We are going to kick off. We've got a real treat for everyone today. I'm Allie Bhutani, Global Director of Brand and Content for Hivebrite, and I'm really thrilled to be joined today by Megan Brogdon, Senior Director of Marketing and Communications for Case, and Matt, Director of Professional Services here at Hivebrite. So today we'll be diving into data migrations. Many of our customers here at Hivebrite transition to our platform from other legacy community platforms. And we know there's a lot of hesitation about migrating your precious communities, your data, your member engagement, a lot of kind of concerns. So we wanted to address that today, share our proven methodology that not only eases the pain of migration, but actually presents opportunities to enhance and improve your community along the way. So your two knowledgeable presenters today will show you both sides of the migration process, from how we approach migrations here at Hivebrite to how our own customers experience them. And Megan and Case recently went through a community migration to Hivebrite. So without further ado, let's hop right in. Just jump over here. Okay, we've got our presenters. So Matt, you've had a lot of experience with different communities migrating over to Hivebrite. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the hesitations that folks have when you're talking to them in the beginning about changing platforms, despite some of their struggles and dissatisfactions with their existing platforms?
Yeah, indeed. So yeah, we have worked with many associations, and most of them they stick with an old community platform because switching feels riskier than staying put. We have seen communities becoming very outdated, but the perceived risk of switching is higher than the pain of staying, in fact. And usually the risks that they have concentrate into two areas: the member experience and the data. Member experience, because it's always a change management challenge to go from one platform to another one. It can disrupt the experiences and the habits. And the second risk is data continuity. So making sure that the user's profile, the community story, and everything is migrated so that the new platform starts accurate and complete. And until associations are confident that the experience will transition well and that the data will be replicated accurately, they tend to defer the move to the new platform.
Perfect, wonderful. And while we get started today, I'm going to actually launch a poll to find out a little bit more about our audience here. So where within the migration platform, if everyone wouldn't mind answering, where are you? Are you guys just getting started? Are you actively comparing different platforms? Have you selected Hivebrite and want to know a little bit more before you dive in? We'll give everyone a second here to fill out the poll. Here. Okay, one more second. And I think we are good. So we've got a lot of people who are selected Hivebrite and want to learn a little bit more about the process. And then a lot of folks who are just kind of researching. So you're in the right place. We're going to kind of talk about the migration journey from beginning to end today. And Megan, let's talk a little bit about your experience. So many association leaders here today and who will be watching on demand can really relate to feeling stuck between the frustration with their current platform and the uncertainty of shifting to a new one. Can you share what specific hesitations or concerns your team had before deciding to make the switch, and what ultimately helped you overcome those doubts and make the decision to migrate?
Absolutely. Matt has already hit on a couple of our concerns. We used our previous communities platform for more than 10 years. We had almost 30 staff users in that system, many of which had been with the organization for several years. So our processes were so ingrained. I mean, everyone had their expectations set. They know exactly what they were doing in the system. And there was a perceived burden of transitioning to a new system. It's hard to accept trade-offs without knowing what those are. It's really difficult to change habits. But we really, really felt compelled to make the change after seeing the impact Hivebrite would have on our member experience. Ultimately, that just helped us overcome those doubts, and we saw that would be a vast improvement for our members to improve our community engagement.
That makes a lot of sense. It's a kind of a big undertaking to embark on. And maybe you could share a little bit about some of the primary challenges you faced with your previous platform that led Case to explore new community solutions to begin with.
Sure. Like many associations, we're constantly evaluating our tech stack. And at the time, a year or so ago, we had completed a tech audit. So we had acknowledged that our existing AMS system would no longer integrate with our communities platform, which really forced our hand. It was going to make it really difficult to enjoy the integrations that we had relied upon for so long around users and products, and really that drove the management of that system. It presented a big challenge for us. But also, we've been in that system for 10 years. As the organization has grown post-pandemic and just in the new world that we find ourselves in here in higher ed, we started to run into these roadblocks and slowdowns with that system. We just saw a lack of flexibility and a lot of inefficiencies in how our staff was using the communities to engage their members and their constituencies and ultimately meet our own goals and serve our community. And it became harder to focus on how to engage them because of how laborious it was to manage in the communities. So we found that, we couldn't really accept those roadblocks much longer. We really had to take on the challenge of a new system. And it felt a little bit more energizing to us than just saying, for our tech stack reasons, we need to take the switch. It's actually put it in our member experience focus, and really solidified the reason for making that transition.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I'm sure it's, a super nuanced kind of a decision to make, but when you kind of triangulate it between the internal struggles and then the member struggles, makes a lot of sense. And Matt, when associations first approach you about a migration, what are some of the most common technical and operational concerns they express about the process itself? And how does Hivebrite's methodology really address these migration anxieties?
Yeah, as Megan mentioned, when associations first reach out about migration, they usually have already overcome their concern about user experience. So they have assessed Hivebrite, they know that they want to stop their old platform, and they know that the user experience will be better. But they still have some questions about the data itself. And they typically share three main concerns about data cleansing and preparation. So how do they extract the data from their old platform? How do they clean it? How do they make it fit to Hivebrite? They also have some concern usually around how to keep their community history. Are they going to be able to
Mhm.
migrate all the historical data and how? And then member disruptions also, like they usually relate to system downtime and change management of using a new platform. And so those concerns, those are the ones that my team has been focusing on for solving for the past years to provide a seamless migration for our associations communities.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider during the migration process, all around, and especially communities with a lot of historical data. We can imagine there's a big concern about losing that there. And so, Megan, what were some of the initial concerns Case had about the data migration process itself?
10 years is a lot of data to sift through. We have a lot of different staff users who use the communities to engage different constituencies around in-person events, our topical communities, and even our volunteer groups. So one of the concerns was actually, what do we bring over? The wide use of the platform really presented a fear that the members in this new system wouldn't see the data that they expected to see. It wouldn't be seamless. So that really was a concern, kind of making those decisions of what to bring over. The timing of it was also a concern. We have conferences that happen throughout the year, and so we have communities that support those conferences and bring that in-person engagement to a digital experience in this platform. And there never really felt like a good time. And there really isn't a good time to make that switch when you have active users really relying on the platform. But many of the staff who managed the groups knew there was potential for disruption and shared that with me. And we worked through that together. Um, I honestly appreciated that feedback that they gave along the way. And it really helped us kind of have those conversations as we were working through the migration, down to the day to knowing what the impact was going to be. So they were really just concerned about like users and the content and just making sure that there was a seamless opportunity there. But it also gave us an opportunity to assess our platform differently and really think about the timing and the data that we stored in the system. And when there are ways to kind of clean it up or sunset it or even clean up our own data on an ongoing basis.
Mhm. Makes sense. And I know as we were talking to prepare for this, kind of easy if you have one big annual event to maybe manage the migration around that, but Case hosts many, many events throughout the year. So like many things, yeah, it seems like there's never really an opportune time. You just have to make sure that you're prepared and kind of plan through when to pull the trigger. Awesome. Let's see here, my next slide. Now I think we'll dive into Hivebrite's specific migration process, give you guys a little bit more detail about this. And Matt, I'll have you talk through our migration process a little bit. Can you share a little bit of an overview of what a typical scope of a migration looks like?
Yeah, sure. So our migration process is tailored to the community's requirements first. So we start by scoping exactly which objects will be migrated for the change of the platform. So when associations are migrating to Hivebrite, they don't want to migrate all the data one-to-one, as they want to take this opportunity to clean the data. So the migration is typically mainly for items related to user data and to their interactions on the platform. So groups, user profiles, forums, media center. And then we can add specific modules depending on the needs. So for example, past events or job opportunities or any other objects. And that's how we are able to have more granular detail on the migration and do it object by object. Then we define the scope. So we define how many waves we want to migrate. So for Case, for example, we did 2 waves to get the most up-to-date data. And finally, for each wave, that's the next slide, Ellie. So you can see here all the process. For each wave, we are going to iterate the process of extracting the data, cleaning, mapping, validate with the community. We'll go back to this later, review it, and then import it. And we reiterate for each wave and each load.
Super. Thank you. That was really detailed. So Megan, how did you guys assess which objects you wanted to migrate within the migration?
So we started with narrowing down our groups. Looking at the slides, giving me flashbacks, seeing these data tables that Matt presented to us and just the sheer volume of data that we had. But we ended up narrowing down our groups to our active communities around conferences. So conferences that had happened within a time frame that users were still expecting to find files and engage with other attendees around. We also have around 11 topical communities. So those have, years and years of data and files and discussions that people reference all of the time, as well as some volunteer groups that are used to engage specific volunteer groups. That got us to 29 groups pretty quickly. And also from there, we looked at the users and the files, and it really, those 29 core groups contain the majority of our active users. Those topical communities contained the majority of users in the platform overall. So once we narrowed down to the groups, to the users and the files associated with those groups, we then started narrowing down the amount of data we wanted to bring over from how many years going back. Did we need things prior to 2020? What did it look like if we only brought over users that had logged in after a certain time, just to help us kind of keep it fresh and active, and making sure that we weren't bringing over so much historical data that it felt, just kind of convoluted and complicated in that way. So no, we didn't bring over all 10 years worth of data, but we did bring over a pretty generous amount. We just wanted to make sure that some of our users, we all have lurkers. We have people who may never post or engage on the platform, but they're referencing and reading along, that they would be able to do so and see what they expected to see. You wouldn't believe the number of individuals who would reach out and say, I'm looking for this one presentation from 2 years ago. I can't, where is it? I can't find it. So we were really generous in what we brought over, but we did try to prioritize on what the active use was at the time of transition. Just to say, Matt's approach to this really guided us. It maybe took longer than we planned, but the process of working through that and filtering down all of these files and data and users based on the groups really established some core data management parameters that we still consider today. And it just really helped kind of refresh our users' approach to these communities overall.
Mhm. And the migration process is pretty extensive. I understand you kind of go into it with one plan, but did any of your plans throughout the migration process change? Maybe as you kind of got started or were working on prioritizing what to migrate over?
Sure. And, first I'll say that Hivebrite made it so easy to migrate this data in the groups that we actually ended up increasing the scope and going for another wave of data, right? We started with this core group of data to bring over, and then kind of ran into a point where we wanted to bring more over kind of in a short time frame. And it was so easy to do so that um, we just made the decision and went ahead with it. We use these communities to engage around these in-person events. So we really had to prioritize that and didn't want to lose any of that engagement. And it also just helped with staff buy-in as well. They felt really comfortable in the system and supported in that way. So, we did make that change, but we didn't make any other massive change at the time.
Amazing. I am going to answer. We got a question come through that I think is relevant right now for you, Megan. What did you do with the data that you didn't migrate over? And how long did you hold on to that data? Did users come back and ask for anything that you didn't migrate? I bring this up because when we were planning for this, it was really interesting. You had a great story about this.
Yeah, so what's really great about this process is that you retain all of your data. Again, 10 years more of data is plenty to hang on to, but the way that we were able to store and receive it from this process in Hivebrite has kept it organized. You can access it by group, by folder, everything is retained there for you. So we have that data, we have it internally in our storage system, and during this process in the early stages of it, I actually shared those files and links with a lot of my staff users because they brought up throughout this process that they were expecting to hear from individuals because they're kind of on the front lines that they're looking for something that they're missing. And you really wouldn't believe the number of times that we hear, I'm looking for this presentation from this conference in 2019. Can you access it for us? And because we had the data, because it was easy to access and organize all of that, it was actually really easy for us to do so. And another part that I think I brought up the other day, Allie, was we have a library. The case library is a wonderful resource for our members. There are archivists. They collect samples and data from all over higher ed and advancement. So they did not want to lose that historical data for their own purposes. They track trends, they're looking for samples of what institutions are doing. So being able to tell our librarians that we had this vast resource for them and that we weren't going to lose a single thing really got them excited. It helped them feel really safe about the process because they were, worried about losing the data.
Yeah.
And from that moment on, those individuals internally were such great cheerleaders for the system overall and really continue to use the platform even more today.
Yeah, amazing. And I'm going to just kind of pose one more question that just came through for you and Matt, whoever remembers it better. But what did the time lapse look like between the first and second wave of migration data?
Ooh.
Was about 3 months between the two extracts of data. So within those 3 months, basically, as you can see on the slides, there were like more groups to be loaded, new members from the old groups and from the 5 new groups, and also some new posts and some new folders and files. So yeah, 3 months between the two waves.
Perfect. And for the person who asked that, we're going to kind of get into more details about the process, the timeline, moving fast, moving slow, et cetera, in a bit. And kind of last question for you within this section, Megan, did you think about other ways to migrate your data without Hivebrite assisting while you guys were planning to kind of move from one platform to another?
Sure. I think I asked Matt at some point, just in case, what did I need to know if I did need to take a different direction and migrate other data? But honestly, it was so easy, and due to kind of our staffing structure at the time and the timeline we were working against, we felt really comfortable handling it with Hivebrite and not having to take any of it on ourselves. I mean, it was just amazing, and I can't imagine having to do that differently.
No, it's good to kind of be at the end and be able to reflect back on the process too, and see how supportive our team was in getting you guys through the full journey. Okay. So question for Matt, we're going to talk a little bit more about our customer's role in the migration process itself. So Matt, many association teams are concerned about the workload of migration might add to their already busy schedules. Could you clarify what exactly clients need to contribute during the migration process, what skills are required, what realistic time commitments associations should expect to dedicate from their teams?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And so we discussed about the steps of the migration, but not about the roles and the details. And I can see a lot of good question about it. So I will also try to answer some questions in my answer. Like, so migration doesn't mean technical expertise or massive time commitments on your end, because we are using we use our expertise in migration, but we still give associations some control on deciding what they want to migrate. So basically, our philosophy is that we handle the technical execution while you maintain strategic decision-making power. And this creates a great balance between you don't need to worry about the technical complexities, but you remain in control. And basically what we call this as we want to avoid the black box effect. We prefer to have a full transparent migration process where at each step we discuss about our recommendation, about our analysis, and the community leader is taking decisions. So you definitely don't need technical background, and the time commitment that we need from you is to spend some time at the beginning to extract the data from your platform, and then around 2 hours per week of your time to be able to decide and to assess our recommendation. So for example, I will also take this opportunity to give some examples based on your questions. So for example, there is a question about if you can, for example, select some specific articles that you would like to migrate based on their date or based on the number of comments that was on this forum post. And the answer is yes. It's exactly how we proceed. We take the data, we analyze it. So we check the data, we check some fields to see what are the most active ones, which one are the most relevant one. And then we check with Megan in that case to see does it make sense to bring the full historical data, or do you want to select only the most active one to take the opportunity to clean it? For members, for example, we have also the same process. So we are checking at which users have connected into when was their last login date, for example. What is their engagement score, if they have one in their old platform. And then we can assess with Megan, which one do you want to keep, and to just take the most active ones and the most relevant ones so that you start with a clean community.
Okay, thanks for answering some of those questions from our audience too, Matt. And so Megan, from your perspective as someone who recently went through this journey, how did the collaborative approach actually work in practice? And what was your team's experience with the time commitment and the decision-making process? And then were there any like changes, surprises that popped up along the way?
Yeah, I mean, Matt was such a great partner in how he worked with us. So flexible and accommodating for whatever our needs were, our timeline was. The way that we approached this for a number of reasons is I was the lead on the project. So Matt and I would be communicating, and I would often take what he sent me, these tables of data, these questions that he's posing, these ways to present the impact of these decisions on the data to my key staff internally to say, hey, this is what's happening. We have this much data, we need to bring over this much, this is the impact, we're slicing it this way. Here's what it means for you. And because of that clear communication and that approach, and just having the regular drumbeat but also not all done at once, really allowed us to create comfort with staff. It really allowed us to approach it in a really thoughtful and logical way. When you have so much data like that, you're communicating with your stakeholders and really thinking through before you're just, setting the parameters and pressing go. Once you start whittling it down though and thinking it through, it starts to be fun and energizing to think through this new system where you're going to have kind of a clean setup of data, and you've kind of established right there in that moment, what is an active time frame of engagement for users. What are your kind of baseline parameters there? it gets really satisfying for your internal team to kind of see those numbers change and see what you're bringing over. So that was kind of surprising, right? That it could be fun and energizing at the end of the day. I'm not sure how many people would say that, but I really enjoyed kind of assessing the numbers and seeing what was in our old platform and what we're bringing over as a baseline.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's a real opportunity to kind of look at things with a fresh set of eyes and kind of give yourself a bit of a restart if you need to. So you talk a lot about internal folks. When we think about data migrations, a lot of concerns we hear about like our members. How do we make sure that we create a smooth process for them? Do you have any advice on how to prepare and inform your team internally for migrating your community?
Yeah, I felt it was really important to spend time talking and listening to our key users, on the staff side early on. I wanted to hear how they were actively using the community's platform we were on, what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it. What were the challenges they saw? Because if you establish that really early on, when you go through this process with data migration and the rest of your implementation, that's front and center. You can go ahead and start answering those questions and really addressing those challenges in the moment versus getting to the end of maybe a selection process or an assessment and thinking, what are my requirements actually? So keeping that front center and talking about what works and what doesn't work really allows you to focus on those trade-offs pretty quickly. I'd also say it just really helps communicate the process and decisions that need to be made with those key stakeholders. Early on, I mentioned previously our case library. I was able to talk to them about this process and kind of get their vote of confidence from them. And that helped other staff see, if the library is okay with it, then I can be okay with it and kind of breathe a little bit. So I was really happy to see that it helped others feel comfortable in the process as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of getting that critical buy-in, those cheerleaders to get excited about it, and not position it as this big sort of burden, but really more of like an opportunity, a way for everyone to kind of come together and start something fresh. So, especially in some of the chat questions, Matt, we have some concerns about timing, and timing is often a really critical factor for associations considering the migration, especially those, as we said earlier, who are planning around annual events or membership renewal cycles. Could you walk us through the typical timeline for a Hivebrite migration from the initial assessment to the go live date, and how flexible this can be based on our customers' specific needs or constraints?
Yes, timing is crucial indeed, and that's why we organize our migration depending on the association's calendar and priorities. So for any data migration, there is usually a business deadline for the association, and at kickoff, we align on that date and how much time you want for data assessment and cleaning. And then we follow the 4 phases that I mentioned. So extracting the data, analyze, prepare, and load. And so we handle the extraction, the preparation, and the loading, and associations are leading the assessment of the analysis. And so the typical sequence is that we quickly extract and analyze the community groups, and we share it with the association to take the decision on which groups to keep. And then we extend the analysis to members, to forum discussions, to media linked to those groups. And you set the rules. And then once we approved on the mapping and the rules, we load it usually in few days. So timelines are flexible. Most projects, they take around 1 to 2 months, but we can be as fast as 3 weeks if it's a lot of data and that you are able to make fast decisions. But we can also extend to 3 months, for example, if you prefer to take more time to review and clean. And so it really depends also on you. The timeline I just provided is like when you have thousands of records, like case, like 10 years of data. But I see one question in the Q&A panel that is asking, how much does it take to migrate 50 members, 100 documents, and 50 forum discussions? For that, if your data is clean, it takes maximum 1 day with Hivebrite to load such a low volume of data. Like 50 members, 100 documents, and 50 forum discussions are pretty straightforward. When we talk about 3 weeks, 1 month to migrate, we are talking about like thousands and thousands of data. And yeah, so that was a big
Yeah.
small difference here.
Perfect. I was going to say, it seems like the right time to answer that type of question. Yeah. So we can, depending on the volume of the data that's being migrated and the timeline that customers have, there's a lot of kind of room for flexibility there. And we touched on it a few minutes ago, but now we're going to talk a little bit more about the opportunities that data migration presents. So, kind of another question for you, Matt. Many associations are viewing the migration as really kind of moving from point A to point B, but you've mentioned that it presents strategic opportunities beyond just a technical transition. And can you explain in your experience how a lot of associations have used the migration process as a catalyst for community advancement and data improvement?
Yes, and that's the beauty of this process, is that I mentioned earlier that associations may be afraid of migrating because of member experience and data migration. But in fact, this is the opposite that really happens. Like, the feedback we hear from most associations is that initial concerns about migrating quickly turned into opportunities. And Case is a good example because they have kept a legacy data debt for over 10 years. And over time, too many groups, too many users, and too much data accumulated, and which was creating like heavy data cleansing and manual internal processes, and not knowing exactly what was doing what, and at the end, a big loss of time internally. So our approach is very collaborative. We don't copy everything. It's not a black box. We work with you to clean and rationalize the data. And the result is that you end up with a clean and reliable data set that increases engagement on the platform.
Perfect. Awesome. And Megan, did Case approach its migration as a chance to reset or improve certain aspects of your community data or structure? And were there any like specific legacy issues that you were able to address during the transition to Hivebrite?
Like Matt said, we had just so much data in the system. The integration that we leveraged at the time for users and actually the creation of some of our conference communities just meant that there was a lot of bloat in the communities, and it actually made the backend experience pretty horrific at the end of the day. We didn't have, hands-on user management. So much of that was still controlled by the AMS. So when we went through this process, knowing that, we were migrating this data over and kind of starting fresh, we we were really able to focus and see the opportunities for engagement differently. There's something really transformative about seeing the percentage of activation and users and the user number just right in the back office, that we hadn't been confronted with before, for a number of reasons, right? The reporting structure wasn't great in our last platform. Users weren't necessarily looking for that. They were just trying to do their regular work and engage the way that they're meant to. So that was really, really helpful. Even though it wasn't directly related to the migration piece, it was no longer, I have this group and the users who are in it, and more may, ask to join or may not. It just transitioned very quickly from how do I get more to engage? How do I get more people to join? Because they could actually see that number and actually manage some of the users the way that they had in the past. Those conversations had kind of completely fallen off in the use of our old platform. We didn't have a lot of interest in creating new groups, or thinking of how to engage other groups of individuals through the communities. So while the process was scary for some, and worried about that engagement, it really actually opened their eyes to it, which just allowed us to address so many process improvements from a very practical place.
And the sort of last core topic we're going to discuss today, probably the most important for many of you, is really measuring success and outcomes post-migration. So successful migrations really need clear metrics to evaluate their impact. Matt, could you talk us through how associations should approach measuring success, from establishing pre-migration baselines to tracking post-migration outcomes, and what typical improvement patterns you've observed across successful migrations?
Yeah, I mentioned that migrating is an opportunity, but of course we have to measure it. It's critical when we change platforms. So because migration can affect user experience and data, so we recommend to establish baseline KPIs from your old platform like 2 months before the migration, so that you align with what you track in your old platform and what will be tracked in Hivebrite. It seems obvious, but as I mentioned, some associations haven't been monitoring KPIs closely due to the legacy data debt. And so as you prepare to migrate, we help you identify the key metrics and capture the current values so we can compare the results post-migration. Then during the migration, we track mainly technical KPIs to assess the migration data accuracy. And after the migration, we compare engagement metrics with what you used to have. And on average, in the 31st days, we see a 15% increase in average in member logins, driven by the launch communications and the improved experience. But where the migration already has an impact, it's later, like after those 30 days, usually within 3 months, we can see that the engagement keeps increasing up to 50% sometime, because member returns to a cleaner and a more structured platform. And so basically migration is a strong opportunity to boost engagement, not only when there is a launch, but in the coming months.
So there's like a significant upside rather than just kind of, moving to kind of a more fresh, modern platform. You're actually creating a lot of opportunities for better engagement, better interaction within your members. And Megan, can you share a little bit of how Case has measured the success of your migration? Any specific metrics or improvements that you've seen since the transition?
Sure. So, Matt's right. We had kind of reached this point where we weren't monitoring our KPIs. Our previous platform's reporting was just not really easy to use. And we'd gotten to the point with the data in that system that there's always an excuse, right? There's always well, they're inactive records, all of the above. So that in itself, this data migration and bringing a condensed amount of data over and really having that baseline has allowed us to start thinking differently about those KPIs. And obviously the reporting in Hivebrite is really great. So we'll be able to monitor those wonderfully. But a joke that I kind of had for myself when we made this transition is I had that rough number of active users in our platform kind of in my head, knowing that within 2 weeks, I wanted to see that number back in the system. And we well exceeded that. We have more engagement now. We have more engaged users now. From an early point of the platform, which I thought was really surprising. I'd heard and kind of I felt okay about engagement staying strong in this platform, but I didn't expect it to actually increase the way that it did. So that was just really nice to see. And then the qualitative feedback that we received, we're here to serve our members. So, we can measure that in numbers, but we can also measure that in how people respond to it. And we received pretty immediate feedback from some of our members that they not only enjoyed the new platform, it was cleaner, easier to navigate, but that specifically their profiles were already there. It was seamless to log in, and the data and the information that they expected to see in their groups and communities was there as well. So that really made the difference for us. It was really validating. And just to see the consistent engagement overall, it's been wonderful.
Yeah, I'm sure that's kind of like an exciting after effect of like, okay, we thought this was going to happen and it's, far exceeded our expectations. I'm sure internally folks have been happy about that byproduct too.
Yes.
And speaking of some unexpected benefits, were there any that weren't part of like your original migration goals that you guys saw again, kind of post launch?
Yeah, like I mentioned, having that somewhat clean slate allowed our staff to get into the new system, see how easy and wonderful it was for our members, see how seamless the transition could be. They made this transition from I'm using this platform the way that I've always used it to how do I optimize my use of this platform? What ideas do I have to engage my communities more? What do I need to learn? Or how can I flex into using Hivebrite even more than I had with the previous platform? To me, that's worth its weight in gold. Just the renewed sense of engagement from the staff internal side really kickstarted the use of the platform. And I owe that in a large part due to the seamlessness of the data migration. Having that comfort, knowing that we were right off the bat really comfortable with our users and our members feeling happy with the new system allowed them to kind of breathe and then say, okay, I'm excited. What do I do next? How do I use this? We've had new staff join, and I'm happy that there's a part of the onboarding process that's introducing them to the communities and ideas that are coming along with them. So, we haven't we haven't had that type of excitement in a really long time. So that's just been a really big, not unexpected benefit, but like a really big benefit that is due in part to the migration process.
Yeah, that's really, really exciting to hear. And so we've talked a lot about the technical aspect, moving over members, groups, the technical aspects of the migration. But how has moving to Hivebrite in general impacted Case's broader strategic goals?
Sure. So I mentioned earlier we were reviewing our tech stack and we're in the process of selecting a new AMS. And obviously we've all experienced the world post-pandemic. So we knew that in the year 2025 that digital engagement is only going to increase and become more vital to our members' lives and the value that they see out of the organization and their membership. Connecting individuals across advancement all over the world to one another is a part of our core mission. It's core to everything my organization or my team does and the goals that were set in terms of in-person conferences, online learning opportunities, the library, and the promotion of that is really important to us. So Hivebrite really unlocked that for us. We knew when we were going through the process of selecting Hivebrite and working with Matt and with others and implementing in the system that Hivebrite was going to be able to grow with us. We weren't going to run into some of the roadblocks or slowdowns that we experienced with our last platform, and that whatever decision we take with a new AMS or other systems, that the integrations there would be really potentially life-changing for our digital ecosystem. So in that way, it really has continued to support and enable our strategic goals as they become more ambitious and more vital in this year and beyond.
Amazing. So that wraps sort of the presentation portion of the webinar, but we've got a lot of great questions for Matt and Megan in the Q&A in the chat. So I'm going to hit on a couple of those and hope to give you guys some solid answers about your upcoming or planned migrations. So the first one is for you, Matt. How do you handle custom fields and unique data structures when migrating?
So custom fields, we handle it as part of the migration. So no matter if you want to use our services to migrate or if you migrate yourself, we have custom fields in Hivebrite and you can be autonomous to migrate them or we can do it. So custom fields is definitely not something that is an issue. And for specific database model, it's that's why we have an approach with object by object. So you may have like different objects in your old platform for the same for forums. For example, you can have like 3 entities and we have 1 or 2 in Hivebrite. By doing it object by object will help you to map the old structure to the new one. And that's where we do the data cleaning and the data assessments. So this is something that we do together as part of the data migration.
Perfect. Another question here from Matt, more of a technical question as well. What happens to our member login credentials during the transition?
So on this one, there are like there is 2 options. If you don't use SSO for users, their data is migrated, but not their password for privacy and security reasons. So the only thing that the user has to do is to recreate to activate their account by recreating a password. That's all. If you use SSO for users, then it will be seamless and they would just have to log in with their usual SSO ID and they would just log into the new platform.
Oh, awesome. And this question is for you, Megan, about how Case defined active users. So how did you determine your most active users? As you mentioned, there could be lurkers that are using resources. And did you find that any of those were missed in the first wave? And did they get brought over in the second wave?
Sure. So Matt, you may have to correct me, but we went off of individuals that had logged in within a certain time frame. That is a very generous parameter there. We ended up bringing over, honestly, inactive records, right? Just I could go down that path. If you want to talk about inactive records and your AMS and integrations, shoot me an email because I'll let you know what not to do. But we really wanted to protect those lurkers, acknowledging that they exist and knowing that if they've logged in multiple times in the last couple of years, they're still seeing value out of the system. And we didn't want to lose that opportunity to engage with them in a new platform where they may feel, compelled to interact versus just lurk moving forward. So that, Matt, do you remember if we took it down a notch or was it really that broad.
So the main parameter was this, like indeed, like the one that logged at least once in the past 3 years. But we also applied a filter on the ones that were not blocked in your platform, and also those who agreed to the terms of the community. So basically, not accepting the ones that were blocked or that didn't really agreed with the community terms. And this is how we ended up with this. And we could have added, for example, engagement scoring, but the data was not in your data sets. But for some communities migration, we could also help any parameter that could help to define which user you want to migrate.
Super helpful there. Another question for Matt. Can you group all documents and forum posts under a theme in a specific area?
Yeah, so we have done it for several migrations where you may, as part of the migration, you may take the opportunity to rename some groups, some communities. You may want to merge some of them. You may want to bring your main group community to the global level of Hivebrite. And so all that is feasible because when we migrate, that's where we do the cleaning of the data and some reformatting. So that's a good opportunity to adjust the groups, to merge, to put them under the same umbrella, to rethink a bit about the groups. So we did some of them, some of this with case, and as you can see also, we did 2 waves, and so the second waves allowed also to adjust some of those grouping together.
I am going to ask. Okay, we'll do 2 more questions here. One, this one's pretty straightforward. Can we test the migration before going live? Sure, question a lot of people want answered. Pretty straightforward and simple though.
Yeah, and that's
yes, Ken.
yeah. So that's part, of course, of the process. Any object that we are going to migrate, we load few samples either in your sandbox or in your production environment, because your production environment is not live yet. So you may prefer to have it directly in your live environment. So you test those sample data, and then once you approve, we can load the full set of data.
And the last question we'll get to here today, please feel free to reach out to us too if there are any questions that didn't get answered or you have any follow-up ones kind of after marinating on this a little bit. But can you, maybe both of you, maybe Matt, share some best practices when it comes to scrubbing your database prior to migration and kind of ongoing? One of the questions here from Charlie is more about, are there any programs that you recommend or really kind of around best practices? It does seem kind of quite daunting going through this for the first time.
Yeah, I can just start quickly, but then I will let Megan maybe to answer from a client perspective. But that's what I mentioned by we split the migration into step by step and object by objects, because each object has some dependency. So basically, before the migration, it's thinking about the groups. In the groups, you have users, and then your users have their own data, but also interaction with the platform and contents. And so by drawing those objects together, it helps you to figure out like which ones you want to keep, which ones you want to clean, which ones you want to just keep. And so once you have this, we help you to map to the right object in Hivebrite.
Yeah, and I would say from our end, our last platform relied upon an integration for user data. So, if you created an account with case.org, you essentially had a shadow account in our communities that you activated when signing on to them for the first time. Because of that, and because of the ways that the AMS integrated around conference communities, we had a lot of data in that last platform that wasn't even usable data. So now we don't have that same issue. And I think what I've learned from kind of that realization and learning more about how that integration did work is when we're preparing to do an integration for Hivebrite in the future, what we need to watch out for in terms of what is relevant data to actually bring over. So that's on the integration, kind of big data on the back end side. But on the front end side, we had a very loose process of sunsetting certain communities at a certain point or managing users at a certain point because we want to prevent continuing to just grow the numbers of users who are engaging or maybe inactive records. So we've been starting to reaffirm what those are, including a sunset policy for certain types of groups that need to either be migrated or transition into a different style group. We've been talking with our success managers, Mark and Ria, about that. Actually, they're wonderful. They saved my life quite a bit. So just thinking about what those best practices are from an engagement side can really inform what you do on the data side and vice versa, right? They're not separated as much as you might think. But in terms of best practices for the migration, if you do use an integration right now with your platform, think about what that integration does and the parameters of that existing integration and what that might mean for bringing data over. Because and I won't spend too much time, but we did have a lot of inactive user records. Often we would just see new accounts get created in our system, which there's no inactivity of a record in our last platform. So there was just, hundreds of thousands of users, right? It was kind of ridiculous over time. Definitely take your numbers with a grain of salt and try to understand what the reality of that is before you get too nervous about it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Matt and Megan, for joining us today. This was like really, really insightful. Lots of kind of practical applications of data migrations. Again, to everyone who attended, feel free to reach out to us. You'll get a follow-up email with the webinar recording sometime early next week. You can just reply back to that if you have any follow-up questions. And then I did want to share some additional professional services that we provide as Hivebrite. Again, more technical services when kind of moving over your migrating your community, or kind of any additional data integrations, client-side technical processes. We've got design services. We have a phenomenal in-house design team that helps bring your community to life if you should need. And then some strategy and thought leadership services, again, helping with engagement and kind of your growth initiatives for your community. So thanks so much again to Megan and Matt and everyone who joined today. Be sure to check your email for upcoming webinars and feel free to suggest any topics that you'd like to see.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
Thanks
Megan.
for
Thank you,
having
Allie.
me.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Have a great end of the week.